Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, here at my next Sherlock, BBC Sherlock episode review. This one's going to be for Season 4, Episode 2, The Lying Detective. So getting straight into it, overall I thought this was actually a really good episode. When I first watched the episode, I kind of came away thinking that was like, okay, bordering on very good, but I knew immediately that I needed to rewatch it. And the reason for that is quite simply because a lot of the reveals at the end instantly give different interpretations to a lot of the scenes that happened before, because all of a sudden John's therapist is actually Sherlock's sister, and you have to interpret those scenes differently. You have to interpret the initial scenes of how Sherlock even gets onto the Culverton kind of issue differently, because it was his sister who was feeding the information, not Culverton's daughter. And just in general, like, you have to just think differently about this whole episode because of what happens kind of towards the end. So a second watch of this episode, I think, is almost required to really get your full thoughts about the episode out. And as well as that, to just kind of really kind of construct together what exactly this whole episode was really about because of those reveals. In that, I think the first time I watched it, it was a bit messy when you just watch it for the first time, because you maybe don't get every single line of dialogue really clearly in your head and think everything through clearly. So, like, I still think there are some like issues with the episode, which I'll get into, but it's not like huge or any problems. I think this episode actually did a really good job at actually managing to fix so many of the problems presented by the first episode, which obviously the majority of the fandom really didn't like the first episode because it was just overly dramatic and put our characters in pretty like bad situations and stuff like that. While I still feel like stuff like drug addict Sherlock is just kind of like they've kind of overused that at this point. I really hope we don't see drug addict Sherlock kind of again. I hope we're past that at this point. Just, like, basically, like, I suppose my opinion on that is just that, like, it led to this episode being overly confusing, because during your first watch through of the episode, you have no idea if you're meant to think that Sherlock is just imagining all of this stuff. And immediately upon second watching, you kind of realize that because of the reveals at the end, no, it's just that he's questioning if it did happen because he was like a drug addict at the time. And so it's stuff like that, like you were just doubting the entirety of like everything that was happening because it was Sherlock on drugs and all this stuff was going on. But as I said, it ended up resolving, because of the main plot, most of the key issues in a slightly convoluted way to get Sherlock and John to be kind of friends again. But in the end, there were some really good scenes that actually brought them together as, you know, characters once again. So, I suppose getting into let's just talk about the main kind of gist of what the story is, and that is that it is very based off the recording that Mary left for Sherlock to save John. And we see the full kind of details of that. It's basically the whole go to hell thing is literally, Sherlock, you have to completely put yourself at risk, because John will never ask for help at all. You kind of have to get him to help you, and that involves putting yourself in danger, and he will come to help you because that's who he is. That it showed Mary's understanding of her husband, that she knew that this would be the only way to really kind of get him out of this situation that she knew he would be in after the death of herself. And I thought that worked in terms of like revealing a lot more about what that full recording actually was and how they used it later on, and that John actually got to see it. And that was kind of, I think, quite well done as you got towards the end of the episode, and the reveal started to come out that, okay, this is a complete plan, in that, okay, Sherlock is put onto this case of Culverton. He's given the hint about this and decides that this is what I'm going to use to, I suppose, enact Mary's plan, and challenges him and basically gets himself put into a situation where Culverton is going to kill him, and that forces John to come and save him to obviously kind of fix their relationship in a way. That, obviously, as I said, kind of convoluted way of just fixing a friendship, but given that it's this show, it's quite understandable. The, I suppose, complications that are added to that is that we now know that it was actually Sherlock's sister Euros who was the one who set Sherlock onto this case in the first place, because she reveals at the very end that she got the original note from Culverton's daughter Faith, added some extra stuff onto it to kind of, for Sherlock to figure out, like, right at the end. And obviously we didn't really get Sherlock's reaction to, like, what exactly all of that means, and that he's obviously still going to think it's Moriarty. And I think what we're meant to believe is that Faith says that she knows Culverton through a mutual friend, and I think we're meant to assume the mutual friend is Moriarty, and she's working for him, or whatever. Or maybe she is the Moriarty, and the Moriarty that we've seen already is someone else. I don't really know. There's obviously a lot of crazy stuff that could happen. But that's an interesting point, that just it was fundamentally with Sherlock's sister who gave him this case, and effectively, like, she... I don't know if this was her aim. I think there's still a lot of confusing aspects of, like, what exactly was Sherlock's sister kind of trying to do here. But she basically gave Sherlock this case to solve, to take down Culverton, to bring John and Sherlock back together, and then kills John at the end. Like, it is kind of weird in that sense, but I don't think John's dead. I think that was just a cliffhanger thing that they did at the end. I don't think there's really many ways they can actually approach doing the last episode if John is just dead at the start. I think it's probably just some sort of a tease, and that she will want to, I suppose, use this as a way to fully reveal herself to Sherlock, that, like, I could have, but I didn't kill your best friend. I actually brought you two back together. Like, I'm back, Sherlock. I think that's kind of what she's going for, in that this episode, plus a lot of stuff from the previous episodes, begins to, like, link in quite heavily with the idea of, like, okay, there's either 3 Holmes siblings or 4, in that you can either link the whole Sherrington thing into that being about Euros, and that, like, maybe Euros has escaped from Sherrington, which is maybe some sort of a mental institution that she was held in, because they talked about it being secure, and, like, they were kind of doubting themselves, Lady Smallwood and Mycroft. Or Sherringwood is actually the 4th Holmes sibling who is separate from Euros, or what, because there's the whole East Wind thing, and that, like, that's what her name means, and then Mycroft would constantly say things about the East Wind. But they also talk about it as if there is another brother, not just that there's another sibling, and they were vague about if it was meant to be a brother or a sister. So I think there's still a lot of reveals that can come out about the Holmes family tree. And then obviously a lot of people are speculating about stuff like, they've done the whole thing with Sherlock a couple of times now, that, like, it's never twins, and now we have this potential for, like, multiple other Holmes siblings, of just, like, okay, so does that mean Euros is Sherlock's twin? Or is there another brother, and maybe that's Sherlock's twin, and that's why he hates talking about twins, and he thinks it's never twins, because his life obviously was maybe affected by twins, because he keeps having that little flashback to the whole idea of, like, the dog Redbeard, and then, like, teasing about stuff that happened in the past. So there's obviously some big family issue that happened between a lot of the siblings, and that's potentially why Mycroft tends to protect Sherlock a lot, because there's this implication that, like, he couldn't protect one of the other siblings or something like that. But whether that be, like, something with him happened, and maybe he caused Euros to go the way she is, and he doesn't want that to fully happen with Sherlock. That's why he seems to care more and, like, focus so much on Sherlock, that he doesn't want him to fully go off the deep end. And as much as maybe he doesn't come across as caring, that's his way of caring. It's really interesting in that sense. Like, there's a lot of interesting dynamics that the show has presented, and it's obviously left for the last episode of this season to, like, fully resolve it and bring it together. But I like the stuff that was presented about, like, Euros, and that, like, she seems to be this kind of master of disguise to some degree, and I suppose she has I don't know if it was just that she took out one contact lens, or there was only one contact lens in the first place, but she's either has the kind of dual kind of dichromatic eyes, that one's one color, one's another color, or she just didn't take out another contact lens. I assume the contact lens was more to kind of remove the fact that it's this really unique visual trait that she has 2 different colored eyes, and that's what she wanted to hide. But it is definitely interesting, as I said, just the idea that she stayed undercover for a couple of weeks, as John... well, not a couple of weeks. I suppose the way they explain is that was his first meeting with the therapist. But, like, that she knew that she basically figured out all the stuff with John and purposely became his therapist and listened to him, that to some degree Euros's plan involves John and Sherlock's friendship, and that she wanted to bring them back together to do something with regards to the two of them. So I think it's probably some sort of a vendetta that she maybe has against her siblings, or Sherlock specifically, that she wanted, like, John to be Sherlock's friend again, and then maybe take that away from him at the last moment, or something like that. There's a lot still to come, of course. Yeah, getting back to the, I suppose, the Culverton thing as the kind of case of this episode. I still think there's some confusing aspects to this, in that the whole IV scenes of these board meetings that he has, where he tells people secrets and then he watches them forget. It was an interesting idea for drama in the first scene, to kind of present this idea of like memory alteration as a thing across the entire episode. But reflecting on it, like, they only refer to it in two scenes. They like have that scene at the start, and then they go into that room later on and just kind of like try and like out him as being a serial killer because he has this room full of IVs. But it doesn't. I suppose my issue here is that, like, thematically, or what is the theme of him as a killer? That's what I was never really clear on. Like, what exactly way did he go about committing doing his kills? In that they seem to just present the idea of like that he is so famous and has such influence and such power that he can do all this stuff because, like, he owns a hospital, and basically the threat that he has over all these people, he basically can commit murders, store the bodies in this hospital, and no one ever knows that he's done anything, that he's stayed undercover, mass murderer all these years, and no one has ever known about it because he has such influence. But, like, the whole memory alteration thing is just like, was that just for the thrill that, like, he finally reveals it to some people, but then he knows that they'll never remember it to tell anyone, and that's just the biggest thrill to him ever, that he has come close to being caught, that there's that thrill for some of the villains, that they, when they come close to being caught but don't quite get caught, that's like the biggest thrill of all. They didn't really seem to emphasize that as an aspect of his character. And then at the end, like, is it meant to be very much the case that he just kills hospital patients? Like, the way he came in through the wall to kill Sherlock, was that meant to be the way he committed all of his serial kills? Like, it was just a bit overly, like, they didn't fully, like, commit to telling you, like, what exactly his deal was. That they just had him go up against Sherlock, and we were meant to assume that we, through Sherlock, kind of know everything that he was doing. I'm assuming that that's the way he did all of it, that, like, he built that ward in a specific way, where he could come in, do something with the machinery, no one would ever know because they don't know about the secret passages, and it would just be like, oh, our machineries didn't ended up not working, someone died, bring them to the morgue, and he has the access to the morgue, so he has the pleasure of, like, killing them there in the room, escaping, and then going back to the bodies of the people he's killed in the morgue later on. I think that's what we were meant to take away, but again, they never had the moment of Sherlock, like, I think, completely just analyzing him as a villain and kind of saying, oh, you commit your crimes in the hospital, doing this, doing that, or what. Like, there was just, for me, not a lot that really linked the whole memory alteration thing with the hospital and what he's doing as a serial killer. I liked him as a character. I thought he was really well acted. Came across, like, super creepy in so many of those scenes. Like the scene when they go to the hospital and do the Sherlock and John visit to the kids, that was really, like, it was meant to be like this uncomfortable scene where, like, you see them, like, instead of going from, like, the fun mysteries and cases that Sherlock and John have been on, and kind of going through the whole like, science of deduction and stuff like that, like, Culverton just starts talking about, like, what if the Queen was a serial killer, and like, he gets really serious, and everyone's just getting super uncomfortable in the scene. The kids, it's, like, completely not suitable for them to be hearing, but the doctors can't say anything because he's going to fire them because he has such influence. And then Sherlock and John are just like, he's effectively like confessing here and then without quite doing that, and he just kind of laughs it off as a joke. I like that aspect of his character, that, like, he had such influence and is kind of so well known as kind of having that sort of sense of humor that he can just get to that point where like he comes across like a serial killer, and then just laughs it off. Like the 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 kind of corny bit, but like I thought it actually really worked, of like him doing the serial campaign where he's just like, I'm a serial killer, and he's just admitting it there, and then you see that he's doing an advert for a type of cereal that's called Nash or something like that, and that's just the kind of theming of the ad. I actually really like that, and like the joke that Sherlock had like later on, where like it's good because it's true. Like I thought that worked. And like in the end, I suppose like this idea that like ultimately Sherlock took Culverton down by like planning everything in advance. That 3 weeks time skip between us, his meeting with Faith slash his sister, and the whole John coming back into play and them taking down Culverton, that he planned everything out so carefully prior to him becoming like overly addled by drugs. And like he organized like Molly come at this time, Mrs. Hudson drive your car to this point to get Sherlock, and figuring out exactly where John would be, and like all that sort of stuff. That was interesting. And then obviously the plan of like he knew that you eventually get to a point where John would give him the cane as this kind of memory of him, and that would be the recording device that would ultimately take down Culverton. And then he just had to, I suppose, accept the fact that like he's the type of character who, once he's caught, would actually realize there's a thrill in like telling everyone everything that he's done. And you could see that Lestrade was like, it was a pain for him to listen to all the horrific stuff that this guy's done to the people he's killed, that he just wants to sit there and confess for hours and hours and hours. And that even though, like as Sherlock says, it was basically entrapment how we caught him, he was actually okay in the end with like telling everyone everything he did. I thought that was an interesting take on the villain, that he's ultimately like, okay, I'm caught, but I'm even more famous now because I'm like this ultimate serial killer who went undetected for so long. I'm so famous right now. And that's kind of all that character cared about in the end. Like I think they ultimately have a little bit to do to kind of connect him with, I suppose, Moriarty, Euros in the next episode. I don't really suspect he will be a focus character in the next episode, but we may see him again. So he won't just be this kind of one-shot character this time out. But as I said, apart from a couple of little connection things about like what exactly was this whole thing as a serial killer, I thought he was actually a really interesting villain. But yeah, let's get into some of the kind of other bigger character moments with. Because first of all, Mrs. Hudson. This is probably her best episode overall as a character. Not just in terms of the kind of more kind of jokey stuff that they do with her, with just like the whole idea that like, okay, she has this Aston Martin as her car, and the whole like almost like humorous stuff that they have with like who her husband was, a drug dealer and stuff like that, and that's why she has so much money in the car. Um, but those like those were good, but like the fact that like yeah, she kidnapped Sherlock, and that was like funny that she ended up doing that and taking him out, and the fake crying she did to kind of get John on the case. It was the moments later on where like they find the where they find the DVD that Mary left for John, and Mrs. Hudson immediately takes over and is just like, everyone out, this is a video about my friend's dead wife, he has to see this alone, I have to be there for him. And Mycroft stays, and she's just like, no, you get out too, you reptile. I like that moment because it was just like, no, you don't get to see this one. That, no, this is between us. If you were closer to him, we'd let you, but right now you are just this uncaring person. This is not. We don't need your comments. Watching this kind of thing, and then like obviously the other bit of her being the one to truly, I suppose, get Sherlock. That like it was actually this really, I think, big scene, big reveal for the series, of just that like Mycroft fundamentally doesn't understand Sherlock, especially at this point in time. Just this idea that he sees his brother as like a slightly like less intelligent version of himself. That they're just kind of almost robots basically. Whereas Mrs. Hudson and like anyone who's actually like close to Sherlock understands that okay, he's super intelligent, yes, but ultimately he is in a way like very much controlled by his emotions in what he does, in that it's his weakness as a character, Sherlock, and that he is so intelligent, but he lets his emotions kind of cloud that judgment from time to time, whether that be the drugs or the excitement of taking down the villain and he gets himself into danger and stuff like that, or he talks the villain into shooting. It's that sort of aspect that like is the emotion that comes out when he can't figure something out. He shoots it, stabs it, and it was one of those things where like if you hadn't necessarily been super following the show and just were a kind of casual watcher who just watched the episodes, them pointing this out at this point in time, I think would have been a really big reveal, and it worked. I think completely that the people close to Sherlock get who he is as a character, and I thought it was very very well done because we are seeing in these last two episodes that Sherlock is a character who, especially now, is more caring about the people around him. The extent that he's willing to go through to like save his friends, and his understanding, I suppose, in that moment where he talks to Fate about the idea of suicide, and that your life is not your own. Like if you take your own life, you're not taking it away from yourself because you're just gone. What you're doing is you are taking your life away from the people around you, and that is ultimately it. So like your kind of life doesn't actually belong to yourself. It actually is belongs to the people around you, and so it's kind of this sense of like he realizes in that moment what his fake death meant for the people around him. Like he tortured them because of that, and he kind of realizes the extent to which that was kind of put everyone through. And I suppose it maybe speaks towards like potentially some stuff that they're going to address in the next episode with regards to Sherlock's dog Redbeard, or whatever they're going to do. Um, but I thought that was interesting, just that he really he understands like the meaning of kind of life and stuff like that at this point. And then I suppose towards the end, just the idea that when the Irene Adler call comes, that like he still talks about I'm not interested in romantic attachments and all this stuff. That John just is like no, that because of his grief he's just like, why would you abandon this idea? She likes you, you like her. It's clearly like something that can happen. Why don't you just text her? And then Sherlock ends up revealing that he does occasionally text her. It was interesting to see like even more kind of human side of Sherlock coming out here. It was really well done. And then I suppose the important thing that this episode really really needed to hit home well, the whole John Watson situation, John cheating, and they waited until the very end of the episode to do it, but it was really well done. That just they're having this kind of heart to heart moment, kind of John kind of lecturing Sherlock about you have this chance to have this relationship, why don't you take it, because it won't just always be there. Obviously referencing the fact that he's just lost his own wife, his own person that he loved and cared about. And then just as Sherlock's about to say something, he kind of just says, I cheated on her. And I liked how it kind of came out because, one, of course, the reveal that it was just texting. But he admits that the fact that he texted at all, that he even thought about it, and deep down, even though he didn't do anything, that he kind of wanted more, is kind of almost just as bad. Ultimately, like it's like him accusing himself of like a thought crime, effectively. But like it's still him admitting that like it was his flaw. That like all of our characters that we've seen are flawed. This is John's flaw. Sherlock obviously has the drugs and the kind of his emotions taking over from time to time. Mary had her kind of not telling the truth all the time, and kind of holding these things back. So like it's just establishing that all of our characters are flawed. That John, yes, like we question like why he was even interested, but that he in the end, like I think you have to look back on it and the fact that he in the end texted, this isn't going to work, we can't see each other anymore, that he broke it off before anything had happened. I think it kind of makes it that just like, okay, it's a flawed character, he admits it was a problem, that he now is striving to be the person Mary thought he was in the first place and is trying so hard to be that way. That to me really worked. I was so worried with the writing of the first episode that they wouldn't get it right, but I feel they really nailed it, and they managed to, I think most people do a kind of 180 on John, in that they added the flaw to him as a character, but it's not to the point where you just despise him, which was the case with a lot of people after the first episode, that he was just a hated character because of that. I like that this kind of, I think, for most people, kind of completely countered that. So, yeah, a really interesting way to end the episode with just the potential for John to be dead. As I said earlier on, I don't think he's dead. I just think that would be a really weird way to go. Finally, John and Sherlock are kind of back on good terms. We're potentially going to have a good last episode with our two main characters, on the same team, on the same side again, and you're going to just brush that aside with killed in the last second of the episode. I don't think that is necessarily the case. Maybe he is shot, but it was only meant to wound him. Like the goal was never to kill him, but it was meant to like leave a mark that like, no, I was shot by your sister, and that's the kind of call sign to Sherlock that his sister is back, um, and maybe establish some sort of a connection with Moriarty or something like that. I don't think John's gonna die. I just don't know what way they can accomplish that and have it work effectively. Um, Anything else about the episode? There's a lot to this episode, but I think I've covered most of the main things I want to say. Um, Let me just quickly think. I think that's everything. I liked in the end, like the moment of course, John finally, I suppose, breaking down. Like he obviously had his very like broken moment, the sounds that he made when Mary was killed. But I think here we are finally seeing the grief, I suppose, properly come out. Now that he has finally kind of got rid of what he was holding back, the whole idea of him potentially cheating on her. Now he kind of is just has this moment to finally just accept her death, that she made her choice in saving Sherlock, that he doesn't blame him anymore, that he's got the issues out with what he was dealing with, and he just is allowed to kind of grieve for his wife, and Sherlock is the one to come over and comfort him, kind of countering the whole idea of like most people think he's a robot, that he doesn't feel that way, but that he gets at this point in time that this is what he needs. John needs his best friend to comfort him at this point in time, and that's what we got at the end. So I really did like that scene. So I'm going to end the video there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this second episode. Do you think it fixed the problems from the first one? Your thoughts on my review. If there are any points about the episode I missed, or like theories or something like that you want me to talk about, leave the comment in the comments below. But yeah, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.